The Rock stars in this film. After serving in the army, he finds his hometown corrupted with drugs and violence. He must do whatever it takes to save his home and the people he loves. Chris Vaughn, retired US Special Forces Army Sergeant, travels home after 8 years in service. He enjoys watching the cool countryside, remembering his childhood, and greeting a few people he recognizes on the way. Chris stops by a gate to a cedar mill. The place is empty and deserted, and a note on the gate says the mill had been closed. A cop car pulls up beside him. The town's sheriff, Stan Watkins, exits the vehicle. He assumes Chris is looking for work and advises him to try elsewhere. He also invites him to try his luck gambling in a popular casino. Chris says he's okay and turns to leave, but Stan sees his name on the backpack he's carrying. Stan suddenly recognizes Chris. He insists on offering him a ride to his parents' home. After dropping him off, Stan gives Chris a poster asking him to consider re-electing him as sheriff. Chris is received by his older sister Michelle, who's excited to learn that Chris is home for good. She works as a paramedic. His parents, Chris Sr. and Connie, are also happy to have him home. Chris Sr. disapproved of his son's choice to work in a violent area, but he's tried to be supportive. Over dinner, Michelle's son Pete wants Chris to teach him how to use a weapon. He's also annoyed that he has to sleep on the couch and refuses Chris's offer to help him pitch his tent so the rain doesn't flood it. Chris is sad to learn that most people in the town had lost their jobs with the mill's closure, including his father. That evening, it rains and Pete is soaked. Chris offers him the bed, but the stubborn boy refuses. Before leaving the bedroom, Pete asks Chris whether he really killed people, but Chris doesn't reply. The next day, Chris is visited by his best friend, Ray Templeton. Ray reveals that he had fallen into the wrong crowd and became an addict. He was imprisoned for breaking and entering, but has been trying to get his life back on track. He's been clean for 14 months now. Ray invites Chris to a football match with their other friends. Chris learns that their other friend, Jay Hamilton, sold the mill after his father died. He opened up the casino Sheriff Stan was talking about earlier. Jay and his friends join the match while Pete arrives and watches from the bleachers with his friends. Jay and his team play roughly during the last round, injuring Chris's knee and Ray's. After the game, Jay invites Chris to the casino to celebrate his homecoming. Chris and his friends go to the casino, where Jay informs them everything is on the house, so they should just relax and have fun. He excuses himself to do some business. Ray and his friends pay for Chris to have a private dance session. Unfortunately, Chris recognizes the dancer. After a few minutes of conversing, the dancer turns on the lights, saddened to see Chris. She grabs her clothes and leaves, ending the dance. He goes back to the casino and looks around for his friends. Chris realizes that the crab stealer is using loaded dice, so it always lands on 7. He calls the dealer out and demonstrates the cheat to everyone else. The dealer calls security, and while Chris beats up most of them, he's knocked out when someone hits him with a cattle prod. Chris finds himself on a metal table with several men looming over him. One man, Jay's head of security, Booth, tries to get Chris's army medallion, but he strangles him. This angers Booth so much that he grabs a knife and carves something on Chris's torso. The goons beat him up repeatedly and then leave him on the highway for dead. Luckily, a truck driver finds Chris and rushes him to the hospital. The assault saddens Chris' parents and friends. Sheriff Stan promises to investigate the matter, but he appears to be blaming Chris for causing trouble in the first place. Several weeks pass and Chris gets better. One day, Jay visits Chris. He mentions that the crab stealer had been fired and his license revoked. He gives Chris some money, asking him to work at the casino as head of security. Chris refuses the money and the job offer, wanting to report the incident. He goes to the police station and meets Sheriff Stan. However, Stan says the matter had been closed after an internal investigation concluded that Chris had started the fight. Stan also mentions that the casino is the primary source of income for the town, so he doesn't interfere in its business. Chris leaves the police station frustrated, but warns Stan that he won't let such injustice stand. The stripper, Denny, visits Chris at home to give him his jacket. The two catch up and Denny asks Chris to vie for the sheriff's election since the current one isn't doing the town any good. When Chris gets back to the house, he finds Connie devastated by a phone call. The two rush to a barn where Pete is being tended to by paramedics. One boy reveals they had pressured Pete to try crystal meth. He confessed that they got the drugs from the security guys at the casino. Chris gets into his truck, but Connie wants him to tell the police. Unfortunately, he knows the police won't help. Chris goes home and retrieves his rifle. His father tries to warn him, but Chris leaves. He goes into the casino but trades the rifle for a block of wood. He enters the casino and starts destroying the games while beating up the security guys. He comes across Booth, beats him up, and retrieves his necklace. He then shatters the observation mirror in Jay's office, and the two men share a deadly look. As soon as Chris departs, he's apprehended by the police. His lawyer advises him to plead guilty and take a 3-month sentence and community service, but Chris wants his day in court. At the trial, many people label Chris as a psychopath, dangerous and deadly. Chris fires his lawyer, suspecting he works for Jay and represents himself. He tells the jury that the town has become so corrupted that no one feels safe anymore. He will run for sheriff and restore the town to what it used to be. Chris removes his shirt, exposing the scars he got from Booth's attack. People are angry, and they celebrate when Chris is found not guilty. Sure enough, Chris is elected sheriff. He fires all the deputies and hires Ray. Ray had been a drug addict, so Chris wanted him to help crack down on the drug operation in the town. One day, Chris stops Jay on the road and breaks his taillight. He has customized the woodblock from earlier into a large club and uses this instead of carrying a rifle. Chris and Ray follow the drugs and eventually arrest Booth. He refuses to cooperate, so the two destroy his car, hoping to find stashed drugs. Booth warns Chris that so many people are involved in the drug trade and they would kill anyone who messes with their business. Chris is worried about his family's safety. He gives Chris Sr. a rifle for protection. The older man wonders why Chris makes everything his fight. He's reluctant to use the rifle since he's against weapon use. One night, Chris asks Ray to watch over the house while he stays at the station. Denny brings him a home-cooked meal, revealing that she's no longer working at the mill since Chris' return motivated her to be better. The two act on their mutual attraction and get frisky. In the morning, Chris makes some coffee for Denny. Elsewhere, Jay calls someone with instructions. Suddenly, a loud bang is heard outside the police station, followed by a shockwave that shakes the station. Chris sees that someone has blown up his truck, much to Booth's excitement as he yells, "A truck for a truck." Stan and his former deputies start shooting at the station, mocking Chris for picking a fight he couldn't win. At the same time, Ray finds some thugs have snuck in and are holding the family hostage. Chris deals with the 3 men outside the station while ensuring Denny isn't hurt in the process. Fearing for his life, Booth reveals that Jay is making the drugs out of the old mill. Unfortunately, he's shot and dies before Chris can help him. The firefight continues and Chris manages to defeat the gunman. He and Denny go home, where Ray and Chris Sr. have also defeated the thugs. In the aftermath, the family fears for their lives. Chris drives to the mill to confront Jay. He finds the mill strangely quiet. He also sees the meth lab, but no one is present. Chris ventures into the mill on high alert in case he's ambushed. Eventually, he spots Jay sitting in a corner in the control room. Jay asks Chris if he remembers playing hide and seek in the mill when they were little. Chris lunges at Jay, but he presses a button that causes the floor under Chris's feet to open. Jay starts beating Chris, but he grabs the rod and pulls Jay down, and they fall through the chute into the lower floor. The 2 men fight for a while, and Chris escapes into the wood after his leg dislocates. Jay grabs a fire axe and follows him, determined to end the fight. Another fight ensues, but this time Chris wins. He breaks Jay's legs, explaining that this is his town now before arresting him. Chris shuts down the casino, mocking Jay when he takes some games as souvenirs. A bell rings in the distance, showing the mill is back in business.